The final dispatch from Human Command was, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." Part 1. The sky over New Carthage burned red. Not the soft red of sunset, but the angry, flickering red of fire and plasma. Smoke curled from shattered buildings, and the air smelled of melted metal and ozone. On the edge of the colony's main spaceport, a young technician named Carl Dixon crouched behind a collapsed cargo loader, his hands shaking as he tried to patch a broken comms line with frayed wires and hope. Around him, alarms wailed like wounded animals, and the distant thunder of orbital strikes shook the ground every few seconds. New Carthage had been peaceful just 2 days ago, a farming and mining outpost on the edge of human-explored space. It was home to barely 10,000 souls, engineers, botanists, teachers, kids who played in hydroponic gardens and dreamed of Earth they'd never seen. Now it was a battlefield. The Cathari had come without warning. Their ships, sleek, black, and silent, had dropped from warp right above the colony's defense perimeter and opened fire before anyone could raise a shield. Their message was clear. Humanity had grown too bold, too fast. The Cathari Dominion would not allow another species to challenge its order. Commander Daniel Hart stood alone in the ruins of Orbital Command Station Theta. The station hung in low orbit, listing slightly, its hull pocked with plasma burns. Half the crew were dead. The rest were either fighting in the corridors below or evacuating in escape pods that the Cathari were already picking off like targets in a shooting gallery. Hart's uniform was torn, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes were steady. He had sent 3 emergency bursts to Earth Central already. All had been jammed or destroyed mid-transmission. This would be his last chance. He typed with slow, deliberate fingers on the cracked console before him. Power was failing. Life support flickered. Outside the viewport, a Cathari destroyer loomed like a predator circling wounded prey. But Hart wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about the kids in New Carthage's school dome. The farmers who grew wheat under artificial suns. The medics who'd stayed behind to treat the wounded even as the sky fell. They deserved more than silence. They deserved a message that would echo across the stars. The comms array sparked as he rerouted the last of the station's energy into a single, narrow-band transmission. It wouldn't carry far on its own, but if it reached a relay buoy, if that buoy was still intact, if Earth was listening, then maybe it would be enough. He didn't ask for help. He didn't beg for mercy. He knew Earth couldn't send a fleet in time. What he sent instead was a declaration, not of fear but of resolve. "Since you chose war," he typed, "let us show you how it's done." He hit send. The console beeped once, then died. The screen went black. For a moment there was only silence, broken by the groan of stressed metal and the hiss of leaking oxygen. Then the station shuddered violently as a boarding pod slammed into the outer hull. Hart stood up straight. He unholstered his sidearm, a simple pulse pistol standard issue, and walked toward the breach corridor. He didn't expect to survive, but he would make sure the Cathari remembered his name. Down on the surface, Carl finally got the comms line working. Static crackled, then cleared just enough to catch the tail end of Hart's transmission. He heard the words, plain and cold, cutting through the noise like a blade. His breath caught. He wasn't a soldier. He fixed irrigation drones and recalibrated soil sensors. But in that moment, something changed inside him. He looked up at the burning sky and felt not fear but fury. The Cathari thought humans were soft, that they would break under pressure. They didn't understand that humans didn't just build colonies, they built communities. And communities fight for each other. Carl grabbed a maintenance rifle from a fallen security officer and ran toward the central comms hub. If the Cathari wanted war, they'd get more than they bargained for. Not just soldiers, not just fleets, but every man, woman, and child who called New Carthage home. Above, the Cathari boarding team breached the command deck. They moved in perfect formation, armored in chitinous black suits, their weapons humming with lethal energy. They expected panic. They found Daniel Hart standing calmly in the center of the room, pistol raised. He fired once, taking down the lead warrior before their shields could activate. Then he was overwhelmed, but not before he spat blood and said, "Tell your masters." They made a mistake. The Cathari dragged his body aside and accessed the station's logs. They found the outgoing transmission. One of the officers translated the human phrase and frowned. "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done," he snorted. Typical human bravado, empty words from a dying species. He ordered the message deleted and the station scuttled, but it was too late. The signal had already jumped to relay buoy 7, which, miraculously, was still intact. From there it leapt across the void, riding solar winds and quantum echoes until it reached the edge of Sol space. Earth Central Command received it at 03:14 Terran Standard Time. The duty officer stared at the screen for a full minute before forwarding it to the highest level of command. In bunkers beneath Geneva, in shipyards orbiting Mars, and quiet homes across 1,000 cities, people heard the message. Some wept, some raged. Most simply went quiet, then got to work. Factories that once built passenger liners began welding armor plates onto freighter hulls. Universities turned lecture halls into tactical simulators. Retired pilots dusted off old flight suits. No one declared war. No one needed to. The message said it all. The Cathari had assumed humanity would crumble. They did not know that humans had spent centuries fighting each other and learning, always learning, how to wage war with terrifying efficiency. They did not know that when pushed to the edge, humans didn't just resist. They adapted. They improvised. They turned farms into fortresses and schools into strategy centers. And they never ever forgot a wrong. As New Carthage burned, its final message traveled faster than any ship, sharper than any blade. It was not a cry for help. It was a promise. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the first human ships began to move, not in anger but in answer. The final dispatch from Human Command was, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." Part 2 on Earth, the message from New Carthage did not bring panic. It brought purpose. Within hours, every major city hummed with a quiet urgency. People did not scream or riot. They gathered in town squares and factories, and school gyms turned into assembly halls. They listened to the recording once, then got to work. The phrase, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done," was not repeated often. It did not need to be. It lived in the set of jaws, the speed of hands, the way eyes met without flinching. In Houston, Lisa Monroe stood in the middle of a half-finished cargo shuttle bay. She had spent 20 years designing fuel-efficient thrusters for mining haulers. Now she was drawing new schematics on a grease-stained napkin. Around her, welders, electricians, and teenagers with tool belts worked through the night, turning civilian ships into something else entirely. They added reinforced bulkheads, mounted railgun turrets on cargo arms, and rewired navigation systems to handle combat maneuvers. No one asked if it was possible. They just did it. Lisa wasn't a soldier. She had never fired a weapon. But she knew machines and she knew humans. And she knew that when ordinary people were given a reason to fight, they could build miracles out of scrap. She taught volunteers how to reroute power during a hull breach, how to jury-rig shield emitters from old satellite parts, how to keep a ship flying even when half its systems were gone. Her voice was calm, her instructions clear. She didn't speak of glory. She spoke of survival. Across the Atlantic, in a quiet town near Manchester, Kevin Brooks stood in front of a group of warehouse workers, retired teachers, and university students. He had left the Marine Corps 10 years ago after a knee injury ended his field service. Now he wore a faded uniform and taught them how to move in formation, how to clear a corridor, how to use cover. But more than that, he taught them how to think. The Cathari fight in straight lines, he said. They expect order. We give them chaos. We don't need to be stronger. We need to be smarter. His drills were simple. Hide in plain sight. Use noise to draw fire. Fake retreats to trap enemies. He showed them how to turn a delivery drone into a scout, how to rig a kitchen microwave into a signal jammer. The students listened, practiced, and improved. They weren't warriors by birth, but they were fast learners. And they were angry not with rage, but with quiet determination. In orbit around Mars, the shipyards never slept. Cranes swung massive hull plates into place. Robots stitched armor onto freighter frames. Pilots who once hauled ice from Europa now trained in dogfight simulations, their hands steady on controls they'd never touched before. Among them was Nora Briggs, a former cargo captain who had flown supply runs to the outer colonies for 15 years. She had lost friends on New Carthage. Now she stood on the bridge of the MV Horizon, a converted ore hauler, and ran drills with a crew of dockhands and mechanics. Nora didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice was low, steady, and everyone listened. "We're not here to win a fair fight," she told them. "We're here to make sure there is no such thing as a fair fight for the Cathari." She taught them how to fly close to asteroids to break sensor locks, how to dump coolant to create false heat signatures, how to use civilian distress calls as bait. Her ship had no fancy weapons, just a few railguns, some EMP charges, and a crew who refused to quit. Back on Earth, schools closed not because of fear, but because children were needed elsewhere. Teenagers worked in repair bays, coding simple AI routines for drone swarms. Grandparents taught young recruits how to tie knots, patch wounds, and stay calm under fire. Skills from old wars passed down like heirlooms. In community centers, people practiced first aid, signal encryption, and emergency comms. Everyone had a role. No one was too young or too old. The Cathari, watching from their distant command posts, saw only chaos. They expected a formal fleet, a clear chain of command, a single point to crush. Instead, they saw thousands of small actions, scattered across the system with no central leader. They dismissed it as disorganization. They did not understand that this was humanity's true strength, the ability to act as one without being told how. In Geneva, Earth Central Command did not issue grand orders. They sent out open-source battle plans, tactical suggestions, and engineering templates. Anyone could access them. Anyone could improve them. A farmer in Nebraska suggested using crop duster drones to spread sensor scrambling dust. A programmer in Jakarta wrote code that let civilian ships mimic military transponders. These ideas were tested, refined, and shared within hours. The war effort was not top-down. It was everywhere at once. 6 weeks after New Carthage fell, the first human countermove began. Not with a fleet, but with silence. Human ships stopped broadcasting. Trade routes went dark. The Cathari scouts found empty stations, abandoned outposts, and quiet skies. They assumed humanity was hiding. They did not realize they were being watched. Nora Briggs led the first strike. Her ship, the Horizon, drifted near a Cathari supply depot orbiting a dead moon. For 3 days they stayed dark. No engines, no signals, just cold metal in the void. Then at the exact moment a Cathari patrol turned away, Nora's crew launched 3 modified mining drones. The drones carried no explosives, just high-frequency emitters that fried unshielded circuitry. The depot's defenses shorted out. Alarms failed. By the time the Cathari realized what was happening, Nora's railguns had shredded their fuel tanks. They didn't stay to celebrate. They vanished back into the dark, leaving behind a burning depot and a message scrawled in the debris. Lesson 1. The Cathari High Command was furious. They sent more patrols, tightened security, demanded answers. But every time they thought they understood human tactics, the humans changed them. A week later, a fake refugee convoy lured a Cathari cruiser into a debris field rigged with hidden mines. The week after that, hackers, mostly college students working from basements, sent corrupted data packets that made Cathari targeting systems lock onto their own ships. The Cathari began to lose not just ships, but confidence. Their warriors were trained for honor, for clear battle lines, for enemies who followed rules. Humans followed no rules but one: protect each other, and they would do it any way they could. On Earth, Lisa Monroe finished her latest design, a shield mod that used solar wind to deflect plasma fire. Kevin Brooks watched his trainees execute a flawless ambush drill in a ruined shopping mall. Nora Briggs plotted her next move from a star chart drawn on recycled paper. None of them knew if they would live to see the end of this war, but they knew they would make the Cathari pay for every inch of space they took. And far away in the silent dark between stars, more ships were waking up. Not warships, not yet, but they were learning. They were ready. And they carried the same quiet promise that had left New Carthage in its final moments. Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done. The final dispatch from Human Command was, since you chose war, let us show you how it's done. Part 3. 6 months after New Carthage fell, the Cathari Dominion no longer laughed at human messages. Their patrols moved with caution. Their supply lines stretched thin. Their commanders argued in hushed tones about an enemy they could not pin down. The humans were not where they should be. They struck from shadows, vanished without trace, and left behind wreckage and riddles. The Cathari called them the Ghost Fleet, not out of respect, but out of fear. The Ghost Fleet was not a single force. It was hundreds of small groups, each operating alone but guided by the same spirit. Some flew old freighters painted black. Others used mining rigs with turrets bolted to their frames. A few even flew passenger shuttles, their cabins stripped out to make room for weapons and extra fuel. None of them carried official military markings. They did not need them. Their identity was clear in every move they made. At the heart of it all was Captain Nora Briggs. She had once hauled ice from Saturn's rings. Now she led a flotilla of 7 mismatched ships through the dead zones between star systems. Her crew was a mix of former dock workers, school teachers, and mechanics. They slept in shifts, ate ration bars, and patched hull breaches with sealant and tape. But they never complained. They knew why they were out here. Nora's latest target was a Cathari refueling station near the Helios belt. It was small, lightly guarded, and vital to their forward operations. Standard military doctrine would say to hit it with overwhelming force. Nora did the opposite. She sent 2 ships to drift near a nearby asteroid cluster, engines cold, broadcasting a weak distress signal in old human emergency code. The Cathari patrol took the bait. They moved to investigate, leaving the station exposed. While they were distracted, Nora's main group slipped in from the opposite side. They moved slow, silent, using the station's own heat exhaust as cover. When they were close enough, they launched a swarm of modified comms drones, tiny, cheap, and packed with signal-scrambling software. The station's sensors went blind for exactly 43 seconds. In that time, Nora's railguns opened fire, not at the hull but at the fuel conduits. The explosion was clean, bright, and total. The station vanished in a fireball that lit up the dark for minutes. They were gone before the Cathari patrol turned back. No cheers, no victory messages, just a quiet course change and a new set of coordinates. Back on Earth, the war effort had become part of daily life. Children learned navigation alongside math. Grocers traded canned goods for spare parts. Retired engineers held nightly classes on jury-rigging power cells. There was no panic, only purpose. People understood that every bolt tightened, every line of code written, every hour of training brought them closer to making the Cathari regret their choice. In a repurposed subway tunnel beneath Chicago, Lisa Monroe worked with a team of teenagers to build a new kind of mine. It looked like space junk, just a twisted piece of metal tumbling through the void, but inside it held a gravity pulse emitter. When a ship passed close enough, it would trigger, bending local space just enough to throw off targeting systems or rip a hull apart. Lisa called it the junk trap. The kids called it Cathari candy. Meanwhile, Kevin Brooks led a team on Luna. They had turned an old lunar research base into a training ground for boarding actions. Using salvaged Cathari armor and captured weapons, they practiced silent takedowns, corridor clears, and sabotage. Kevin taught them that speed mattered more than strength and surprise more than firepower. They think we're weak because we're not bred for war, he told them. Let's prove them right, until it's too late for them to run. The Cathari began to notice patterns they could not explain. Ships would vanish near asteroid fields. Patrols would lose contact for no reason. Supply drops would arrive empty, their contents stolen or sabotaged. Their intelligence officers grew frustrated. They scanned for military signatures but found none. The humans were using civilian tech, civilian tactics, civilian minds. One night, a Cathari scout ship picked up a strange signal near the ruins of New Carthage. It was a simple music file, just a piano playing an old Earth lullaby. The officer in charge almost deleted it as noise, but something made him listen. Halfway through, the music cut out. In its place was a single sentence spoken in calm human English. "You burned our homes. Now we burn your certainty." The scout ship turned to leave. As it did, 3 hidden human vessels rose from the planet's shadow. They fired not weapons but reflective chaff that blinded the Cathari sensors. Then they vanished again. The scout ship returned to base shaken, its crew whispering about ghosts. Nora heard about the lullaby trick from a relay message. She smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't just about damage. It was about fear. The Cathari had expected a war of ships and shields. They got a war of minds. Her next move was bolder. She gathered her flotilla near a major Cathari convoy route. Instead of attacking, she had her ships mimic the signature of a damaged Cathari freighter. They broadcast fake distress calls in broken Cathari code. When a rescue vessel arrived, they disabled its engines with an EMP burst and boarded it. They took no prisoners. They took data, navigation logs, fleet schedules, command frequencies. Then they blew the ship's core and left. The stolen data reached Earth within days. Within hours, it was in the hands of hackers, planners, and captains like Nora. New targets were chosen. New traps were set. The Cathari, used to rigid hierarchy, could not adapt fast enough. Their orders came from the top. Human orders came from everywhere. One evening, as her ship drifted near a dead comet, Nora stood on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. She thought of New Carthage, of the kids who used to play in its gardens. She didn't know if they'd won yet, but she knew they'd made the Cathari bleed, and more importantly, they'd made them doubt. Doubt was the first step to defeat. Far away on a Cathari command ship, an officer stared at a map covered in red marks, each one a human strike. He turned to his commander and said, "They are not fighting like soldiers. They are fighting like neighbors protecting their street." The commander said nothing, but for the first time his hand trembled, and in the dark the ghost fleet moved again. The final dispatch from Human Command was, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." Part 4. The Cathari High Command had seen enough. Their patrols were failing. Their supply lines were crumbling. Their warriors, once proud and certain, now jumped at shadows. The humans were not just resisting, they were winning, not with fleets but with tricks, silence, and stubborn will. So the Dominion made its final move. They sent the Obsidian Fleet. It was their pride. 10 massive dreadnoughts, each longer than a city block, armored in black composite plating that could shrug off railgun fire. They carried plasma lances that could melt asteroids, and shield generators strong enough to weather a solar flare. The Obsidian Fleet had never lost a battle. It had crushed rebellions across 3 star systems. Now it was ordered to sweep the human frontier clean. The dreadnoughts moved as one, a wall of darkness pushing through space. They did not hide. They did not sneak. They announced their arrival with bursts of energy that fried unshielded satellites and scrambled civilian comms for light years around. The message was clear. This was the end of the Ghost Games. The real war had begun. On Earth, the news spread fast. People did not panic. They had expected this. For months, they had been preparing not for victory, but for this exact moment. The moment the Cathari showed their full strength. And humanity had an answer, though it was not what anyone expected. Deep in the outer asteroid belt, hidden inside hollowed-out rocks and disguised as mining outposts, Project Aegis waited. It was not a fleet. It was a network. Thousands of automated platforms built from old mining drones, cargo bots, and repurposed defense turrets. Each one was small, cheap, and smart. They ran on solar power, communicated through laser pulses, and followed simple rules: hide, watch, and strike when the time was right. Lisa Monroe had helped design the core logic. She called it the hive mind of spare parts. No single platform could hurt a dreadnought. But together they could blind it, confuse it, and wear it down. The plan was not to destroy the Obsidian Fleet in one blow. It was to make it useless. At the same time, on Mars, a team of young coders led by a quiet woman named Priya Nair finished the final version of what they called Trade Ghost. It was a virus, but not like any the Cathari knew. It didn't crash systems. It mimicked them. It looked like a routine data packet from a Cathari logistics hub, just another update about fuel levels or crew rotations. But once inside, it rewrote routing tables, delayed orders, and swapped ship IDs. To the Cathari command, everything would seem normal, until their own ships started firing on each other. The virus was sent not through military channels, but through old trade relays the Cathari had captured months ago, and now used for their own supply coordination. They never suspected that human merchants had left backdoors in the software. Backdoors meant for price updates, now repurposed for war. While the virus spread silently through Cathari networks, Captain Nora Briggs prepared her own part of the plan. She gathered every ship she could, 23 in total, none larger than a freighter. They carried no heavy weapons. Instead, they carried bundles of signal jammers, drone launchers, and one very special package: a comms array cobbled together from old Earth broadcast towers and satellite dishes. It looked like junk, but it could send a focused burst strong enough to overload a dreadnought's command node, if it got close enough. The pilot for that mission was Jake Ruiz. He had once flown survey drones over Martian canyons. Now he sat in the cockpit of a stripped-down scout ship called the Wren, its hull patched with weld marks and hope. His job was simple: fly straight into the heart of the Obsidian Fleet, survive long enough to get within range, and send the signal that would shut down their central command. He knew the odds. He didn't care. His sister had died on New Carthage. This was his answer. The battle began near the ice rings of Thetis Prime. The Obsidian fleet moved in perfect formation, shields glowing, weapons charged. They expected a human fleet to meet them. Instead, they found silence. Then the asteroids around them came alive. Project Aegis activated. Hundreds of small platforms detached from rocks and ice, firing micro-missiles not at hulls but at sensor arrays and comm dishes. The dreadnought's shields held, but their vision blurred. Their targeting systems glitched. At the same time, Trade Ghost finished its work. On the lead dreadnought, a screen flashed. Friendly vessel approaching, stand down. The captain hesitated. In that second, a Cathari escort ship, confused by false data, fired on its own flagship. Chaos spread faster than plasma. Nora's flotilla struck then. Not head-on, but from the sides, launching drone swarms that mimicked human warships. The Cathari turned to face them, leaving their rear exposed. That was Jake's moment. The Wren shot forward like a bullet, weaving through debris and fire. Shields failed. Hull cracked. But Jake kept going. He ignored the alarms, the shaking controls, the blood on his visor from a broken console. He flew straight for the command spire of the lead dreadnought. At 500 meters, he triggered the array, a pulse of raw energy shaped like a human voice saying, "Remember New Carthage," flooded the dreadnought's systems. The command node overloaded. Lights died. Shields flickered out. For 3 critical minutes, the Obsidian fleet was blind and leaderless. In that time, Project Aegis hit harder. Human ships picked off escorts. Cathari ships fired on each other. The formation broke apart. By the time the Cathari restored control, half their fleet was damaged. 2 dreadnoughts were dead in space, and the humans were gone, vanished back into the dark, leaving only wreckage and silence. On the bridge of the horizon, Nora watched the last of the Cathari ships retreat. She didn't smile. She knew this wasn't the end. But it was proof. Proof that even the strongest enemy could be beaten, not by matching their strength, but by using what made humans different: cleverness, sacrifice, and the will to protect each other. Back on Earth, people heard the news. There were no parades, no speeches, just a quiet nod, a tightened grip on a wrench, a whispered good. They knew the war wasn't over. But they also knew something the Cathari were just beginning to understand. Humanity didn't need to be the strongest to win. They just needed to be the last one standing. And they were still standing. The final dispatch from Human Command was, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." Part 5, the Cathari Dominion did not send another fleet. After the failure of the Obsidian fleet, their command structure fractured. Warlords blamed admirals. Admirals blamed engineers. The High Council fell into silence, then into argument. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion faced something it could not control: doubt. Not just in its weapons, but in its belief that order must be enforced through fear. The humans had not just beaten their ships, they had shaken their certainty. 3 months after the battle at Thetis Prime, a single Cathari vessel appeared at the edge of human-controlled space. It carried no weapons. Its hull was marked with the silver sigil of truce, a symbol rarely used, almost forgotten. It broadcast a simple message on open frequency: "We seek to speak." Earth Central Command did not respond right away. They watched. They waited. They made the Cathari sit in the dark for 2 full days, just outside sensor range. Then they gave permission to approach, not to Earth, not to Mars, but to a quiet station orbiting a dead moon. Neutral ground built from salvaged parts and old promises. The human representative was not a general, not a politician. It was Maria Lopez, a schoolteacher from Buenos Aires who had taught history to children before the war. She wore no uniform, only a simple gray coat and a pin made from a piece of New Carthage soil. She walked onto the station's meeting deck alone, her hands empty, her steps calm. The Cathari envoy was tall, armored in polished black, his face hidden behind a smooth mask. He spoke first. "You have cost us much: ships, lives, honor. Why do you not demand more? Territory? Reparations? Technology?" His voice was deep, cold, but there was something underneath. Curiosity, maybe even confusion. Maria looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "We never wanted war. You chose it. We only answered." The envoy tilted his head. "Your final message from New Carthage?" "It was a threat." "No," Maria said. "It was a lesson." She explained that humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other. They knew war better than any species in the galaxy. They knew its cost, its lies, its hollow victories. But they also knew something else. That the strongest weapon was not a gun, but the choice not to use it when you could. "You thought we would break because we are not warriors by birth," she said. "But we fight for something you do not understand. We fight for each other, not for glory, not for empire, for home." The envoy was silent. Then he asked the question that had haunted his people since New Carthage fell. "Why did you not retaliate with equal cruelty? You had the chance. After Thetis Prime, you could have hunted our ships, burned our outposts, killed our young as we killed yours. But you did not." Maria's voice softened. "Because showing you how war is done doesn't mean becoming monsters. It means winning without losing ourselves." The words hung in the air like starlight. The Cathari had no answer for that. Their entire history was built on strength through dominance. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was disorder. But here stood a species that had faced annihilation and chosen restraint, not from fear but from principle. Negotiations began that day. They lasted weeks. The humans did not ask for land. They did not demand surrender. They asked for one thing, recognition. That humanity was not a threat to be crushed, but a people to be respected. And in return they offered something the Cathari had never known, partnership. Not as rulers and subjects, but as equals. The treaty was signed in a room with no weapons, no guards, just two people and a data slate. It opened trade routes, shared scientific knowledge, and established neutral zones where no war could be waged. Most importantly, it included a clause written in simple human words: no species shall decide the fate of another. Back on Earth, there were no grand celebrations. People returned to their lives, fixing ships, teaching children, planting crops in domes under alien suns. But something had changed. The fear was gone. In its place was quiet pride. They had not just survived. They had shown the galaxy what humanity truly was. Nora Briggs flew her ship back to the Sol system for the first time in over a year. She stood on the observation deck and watched Earth rise over the moon's edge, blue, green, alive. She thought of Daniel Hart, of Carl Dixon, of all the names lost on New Carthage. They had not died for nothing. Their message had traveled farther than any ship. Lisa Monroe returned to teaching, but now her students included Cathari engineers curious about human design. Kevin Brooks opened a training center, not for war but for peacekeeping, using the same tactics once meant for battle to protect civilians across star systems. Jake Ruiz, still healing from his wounds, started a program to rebuild colonies using drones and shared knowledge. The phrase from that final dispatch became more than a warning. It became a promise kept, not just to the Cathari, but to themselves. Humanity would never seek war. But if war came, they would meet it not with hate, but with wisdom, courage, and the unshakable belief that even in darkness, they could choose to be better. Years later, children on 100 worlds would learn the story of New Carthage, not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. The moment a scattered, ordinary species looked into the face of a mighty empire and said simply, "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." And they did. Not by destroying their enemy, but by changing them. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.